A very good evening to you. You're watching Newsfirst Review 360. I'm your host Chaturanga Puarachi. This week we saw the launch of the much-awaited export strategy as well as the Sri Lanka Trade Online Information Portal. Also, Parliament approved the Nation-Building Tax Amendment Bill exempting certain sectors from paying NBT to increase entrepreneurship as well as to boost the economy as a whole. Also on the program is a discussion with a world-renowned early childhood expert. First, a look at our top stories.
The National Export Strategy, a blueprint for achieving increased exports, enhanced regional cooperation and job creation, was unveiled on Thursday. The 5-year strategy aims to enable Sri Lanka to reach its goal of $28 billion in exports by 2022.
The strategy sets out specific priority actions to solve competitiveness constraints, to help business add more local value add, to turn market opportunities into real-life success stories, to modernize regulatory systems for greater efficiency, and to attract investments to invigorate Sri Lankan value chains. There was this philosopher that said that a journey of 1,000 miles starts with one step. And this is why the strategy is only as valuable as it is implemented. And frankly, I think it is worth implementing because just this piece of work will mean an additional $28 billion in export revenues between now and 2022.
The strategy sets out specific priority actions and investments to address competitiveness, constraints, modernize regulatory systems for improved efficiency and boost Sri Lankan industries in order to increase exports.
The key objective of the National Export Strategy is to increase the capacity of Sri Lanka's export sector and to improve trade performances. Its competitiveness ensure that our different sectors of the economy become more competitive to get a share of the global market. This is not only a strategy for, it's not only a national export strategy, it's also a jobs and income strategy. If you look at all the developed economies of Asia, they have done so by becoming export economies.
It also sets targets to improve opportunities for micro, small and medium-sized enterprises and exporters in regional and global trade. The National Export Strategy is seen as an important addition to the country's development agenda and its goal of becoming a leading Asian export hub driven by innovation and investment. Technical assistance for developing the NES was provided through the EU-Sri Lanka Trade-Related Assistance Project funded by the European Union.
5-year National Export Strategy is aimed at accelerating our export growth, creating high-income jobs in the export sector, promoting new enterprises to become exporters, and attract foreign direct investment into especially the export-oriented sectors. This strategy has been formulated over many months with very active and direct participation of the private sector. Making this transition to an export and FDI-led growth trajectory is challenging, but it is the only option available for us if we are to create better jobs for our young people. It is the only way we can be sure of making a sustainable transition into a higher income trajectory. What is very clear is that Sri Lanka has a long way to go. And if we concentrate only on our market of 21 million people, we will never be able to achieve the rapid economic development that we need. Our only choice is to integrate with world markets, and exports is a key pathway in that. There is overwhelming evidence on the important role that trade, exports and investments play in accelerating economic growth. Yet, we still have some people who deny this and want to stifle our policy push towards this direction. To them I say, look at the evidence, look at the reality, put aside narrow political agendas, because really there is only one agenda that is truly at stake here. The future of our youth, the next generation of workers, the next generation of entrepreneurs. For them, we need to shape a country that is integrated with the world markets and creates high-paying jobs, not a country that is inward-looking, isolated and uncompetitive. The export sector will gain from the implementation of this strategy, especially from the 4 trade support functions. These are aimed at supporting all sectors, all sizes of firms, and even those who aren't yet exporters but are aspiring to do. Exports now must be everyone's business, not just one agency or one ministry.
The Sri Lanka Trade Information Portal, a tool aimed at offering timely and easy access to trade rules and regulations, was launched in Colombo today. Hosted by the Department of Commerce in collaboration with the National Trade Facilitation Committee, it was developed with the support from the World Bank and the Australian High Commission. The portal will, for the first time, display over 1,000 laws, regulations, procedures, permits, application forms, licenses and applicable fees related to trade in Sri Lanka in all 3 languages.
The Trade Information Portal is a repository of trade-related regulatory information in one platform. This reduces the time and cost of traders in their trading activities, since they need to visit many organizations to get information reduced to a click of a button and on the computer. This would facilitate SMEs in expanding their trading opportunities at a lower cost and shorter time. My ministry is concerned with the SMEs just as global trade. However, SMEs would find it difficult if they cannot access. And now about the process and measures that they need to follow in imports and exports. Not only SMEs but even other potential importers, exporters and international businesses need to know what steps to follow when trading with Sri Lanka.
The Sri Lanka Trade Information Portal is the latest government initiative to increase access to information related to cross-border trade and to comply with the World Trade Organization's Trade Facilitation Agreement. The World Bank said the portal addresses a challenge faced by the private sector.
The Trade Information Portal being launched today, developed by the government with the support of the World Bank and generous financing from the Australian government, responds to a clear challenge from Sri Lanka's private sector. The high cost and large amount of time involved in obtaining information on regulations affecting imports and exports. The private sector representatives here today know the scale of this challenge only too well. In recent interviews conducted for the World Bank, only half of businesses surveyed said that they turned to government agencies for information, and many expressed concern that the little information that is available online is often out of date and spread across many websites. One company summed up the challenge clearly by expressing its frustration that the first time it hears about new regulatory requirements is only when the clearance of its shipments is rejected. This means that traders overwhelmingly rely on their own experience and their own personal networks to gather information. But from today, this will change with the launch of the Sri Lanka Trade Information Portal.
That more needs to be done to open doors to trade and investment if Sri Lanka is to achieve the truly sustainable and inclusive economic growth that it seeks, and to realise its aspiration of becoming a hub, an economic hub in the Indian Ocean region. Sri Lanka needs to reduce the costs for its own exporters and to make it easier for Sri Lankan businesses to link into international supply chains. And this will help create jobs right across the country. And Australia very much shares the commitment of the Ministry of Industry and Commerce, the wider Sri Lankan government and the World Bank together to achieving this for the betterment of Sri Lanka.
Stay tuned to Newsfirst Review 360. On the other side of the break, we will be talking about the importance of budgetary allocations for early childhood development. Welcome back to the show. You're watching BIS Review 360. We have with us in the studio Professor Melwish from the University of Oxford and Sonali Vanigabadge is standing by. Sonali, over to you.
Good evening and welcome. I'm here with Professor Edward Melwish, Professor of Human Development at the University of Oxford, and joins us today on the sidelines of the Sri Lanka Early Childhood Development High-Level Meeting, which recently got underway in Colombo with multiple stakeholders, including policymakers. Good evening and welcome to the show, Professor.
Thank you for inviting me.
Fantastic to have you here with us. Tell us what's the importance of investing in early childhood development, given the fact that most governments are concerned about investing in maybe primary education, secondary education and tertiary, but never for early childhood development. How is this significant and how does this really impact a child's life?
Okay. Well, there's been a large number of studies now across the world which have followed children through from birth right through to adulthood. And in these studies we find consistently that children's development in those early years before they start school has impacts for how well they do at school, and right through to adulthood, which has impacts on their earning capacity, their social development, and their likelihood to be involved in crime and their future health. So what that means is, if you invest in early childhood, you can improve the health, education and general welfare of the whole population such that the population is healthier, it has better educational development and is better prepared for the modern world where we need highly skilled occupations in order to compete in a modern economy.
Professor, so the definition of early childhood development includes investing in health, nutrition, education and protection from birth through to age 5.
That's correct.
So how do governments get involved in this process?
Fine. Well, in terms of health and child protection, they need to have monitoring of children from birth onwards. And you have the health service providers who can do this, the midwives and so on. In terms of early childhood education, you need to ensure that children, certainly from 3 upwards, that they have some educational input through nursery schools and playgroups and that kind of provision, which provides the child with the language experiences and the social experiences that the child needs for adequate development. We find consistently that children who have this kind of experience are doing better right from the moment they start school. Their language development is better, their social development is better, and they do better throughout their lives. For example, we find that children who have early child education are 3 times more likely to get a high grade in mathematics at the end of school. Right. Now, these sorts of factors affect their capacity to enter highly skilled occupations. And highly skilled occupations are what we need for future economic development. So the whole country benefits. We also get a reduced incidence of children who need special care in the health field, in the social field, in the education field. And this reduces the cost to the total system in the long term. And we've had 84 studies now worldwide which have consistently over and over and over again showing that savings in the long term from early child development programs outweighs any cost of these programs. So the whole country benefits.
Professor, you've done a lot of research with regard to several jurisdictions as well. Is there a difference in the findings when it comes to Asian countries as opposed to Western countries? Tell us a bit about the statistics.
There are some differences between countries, certainly. And there's been much more research in Western countries than in Asian countries. But even in Asian countries, there has been some research, for example, in Bangladesh, the Philippines, and so on. And in these countries, we find similar patterns to what we find in the Western countries. Because what we're dealing with here is fundamental human development, principles of human development which apply across nations. And so what we're talking about here equally applies to the Asian countries as it does to the Western countries. And some Asian countries are taking this on board. For example, we find an increase in investment in countries like Singapore, China, Korea, who are all investing much more heavily now in early childhood education because they realize the consequences for the futures of their nations.
If we take Sri Lanka specifically, Professor, something that we find is that there is a dearth of comprehensive teacher training programs, especially when it comes to early childhood developments. You take the nurseries, preschool, across the country, especially in rural Sri Lanka, where most of those teachers are volunteers.
Sure.
So as a result of this, there is no critical learning, critical teaching behind their tasks. So this is one of the main concerns that we face in Sri Lanka.
Yes, you have for many years now had underinvestment in early child development and in the training of staff to work with young children. You have one of the lowest levels of investment in early childhood education of any country in Asia. So you do need to increase this substantially in order to compete in the modern world. And this will not happen overnight.
Right.
You need to build it up year by year by year by year. And for the unqualified staff that you have working in this area at the moment, you need to provide in-service professional development. Again, we have found that in-service professional development is a very effective method to up the quality of provision for children, and it has long-term consequences for those children, and it's fairly cost-effective. It's not so expensive to provide in-service professional development. But as well as in-service professional development, you need to provide college and university programs for staff for the future, and this gradually needs to build up year by year by year. You won't have this overnight. But you need continual investment for the long term. You need to make it part of government responsibilities to ensure that all children are entering school fully prepared to make the most of their potential. At the moment, that isn't happening. And you are seeing children starting school in Sri Lanka who are not fully prepared to make the most of the schooling they will receive.
Right. Can we draw a parallel between early childhood development on the one hand and the lack of a sense of self-esteem in children? Because something that we find in Sri Lanka especially, most children who go through the local curriculum and the national school system, they tend to be backward, they tend to be insecure. So these tend to be characteristics that we see on a daily basis.
You will see quite a few children who show those characteristics, yes. And certainly providing good early child development programs for children will reduce that substantially. But you also need to look, if that's continuing throughout the whole education system, then you probably need to look also at the education system. But I think it is clear to me that the investment in the school system is not so bad in Sri Lanka, but your investment in early child development is way behind where it should be.
Professor, when we speak about economic growth and early childhood development, one area that we can't forget is the importance of nutrition, because focusing on Sri Lanka, in rural Sri Lanka, an issue that we have is malnutrition. So sometimes we find that children go to school without any breakfast, without any lunch, and some children faint in school.
Sure.
So these are issues which we face as a country in much of Sri Lanka. How does this stunt the growth of a child, and how does this feature in the equation of early childhood development?
Okay. Well, those first 5 years of life are critical for brain development, which affects the child throughout the whole of their lives. So if a child has malnutrition in that early period, then their brain will not develop as adequately as it would otherwise. Right. Therefore, that child will never achieve its full potential. So it's essential that you provide good nutrition for children in those early years. And this can be done through early childhood development programs which make contact with the families and ensure that those families are providing adequate nutrition for the children and provide the means to do this. And so this is all part of improving the whole environments of children in order that they fulfill their full potential.
So, Professor, it would be accurate to say that this cuts across, early childhood development cuts across a wide range of areas, including socio-economic, political factors.
Yes. It involves the health of the children, it involves child protection, it involves ensuring parents have adequate knowledge in order to bring up their children, and it also involves providing early childhood education for children. And all of these factors improve the outcomes for children. And you need a universal early child development program to ensure that all children in Sri Lanka benefit.
Sure.
Because all children, regardless of social background, can benefit from early childhood, particularly education programs. Because even if they're getting good health and nutrition and so on in their home environment, there's still learning opportunities which will benefit them, which can never be provided entirely by the home itself before they start school. We find this even in rich countries. With highly educated parents, their children will benefit from early childhood education programs. And we find the benefit happens across the whole social spectrum. But it is the most disadvantaged children who benefit the most. That's why we need to invest in these programs.
Professor, ultimately all of this requires policymakers to bring in legislation, regulations and implement it. So you're in Sri Lanka on the sidelines of a meeting titled Building Brains, Building Futures, the Sri Lanka Early Childhood Development High-Level Meeting. At the beginning of this conversation we said that there were multiple stakeholders and policymakers who participated at this meeting. Can you tell us about some of the proposals that were made there?
Okay. Well, I talked to the policymakers from many ministries, and including the Ministry of Finance.
Sure.
And I showed them the evidence. And they were impressed by the evidence. And there were a number of proposals made at that meeting involving improving child health, child nutrition, child protection, and early childhood education. And the Minister for Finance committed to including extra investment proposals in these areas in the 2019 budget. Because he saw that in terms of the economic development of Sri Lanka, that these investments were necessary for the long-term benefit of the whole country. So there was a very good outcome from this meeting, and this should be the start of a process of improving early child development in Sri Lanka in the long term.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Professor, for your thoughts, your perspectives and expertise. Thank you for coming down to Sri Lanka and for pushing for these reforms which are much needed in this country. Thank you very much, Professor.
Thank you.
Stay tuned. We'll be right back after this short commercial break. Welcome back to the show. Minister of Mass Media and Finance Mangala Samaravira spoke about the obstacles faced by young entrepreneurs when obtaining loans. Let's have a look.
Minister of Finance and Mass Media Mangala Samaravira said banks are scaring away first-time customers, which in turn is hurting the entrepreneurial potential of Sri Lanka. He made these remarks at the inauguration of the dedicated Enterprise Sri Lanka loan scheme counters at the state-run Bank of Ceylon and People's Bank.
අතවසයෙන්ම මේ ණය යෝජනා ඉල්ලගෙන එන ඒ පුද්ගලයන්ට සානුකම්පිතව අහුම්කම් දීලා
Please consider and give priority to the project report of the business, not the collateral. If the business plan is good, give the benefit of the doubt to them. Give them a helping hand. Even if all ventures aren't successful, we hope to have at least 100,000 entrepreneurs within the first year. We have launched this loan scheme with the hope of getting them actively involved in the economy. Under this scheme, anyone can obtain a suitable loan according to their talents.
සුදුසු තමන්ගේ හැකියාවන් වලට අනුකූල වෙච්ච ණය ක්‍රම ඕන තරම් තියෙනවා.
He said that loans given through the Enterprise Sri Lanka subsidized scheme will be evaluated first based on the merit of business plans and secondly on the availability of the collateral.
That's all the news we have for you tonight. You can look us up on Facebook by typing BIS First Review 360. Good night and have a pleasant weekend.